As the F-15E Strike Eagle cleared the 12,000-foot ridgeline of the Zagros Mountains, the radar warning receiver in the cockpit broke into a sharp, urgent tone. The pilot immediately pushed the throttles into full afterburner, and the twin F-100PW 229 engines roared to life, pouring out 58,000 pounds of thrust. Seconds later, an Iranian surface-to-air missile, a ground-based variant of the Sayyad-2, burst just 12 feet from the port engine nozzle. In an instant, the cockpit lit up with red master caution warnings as the flight control system failed. Eject, eject, eject. The two Aces 2 ejection seats fired, launching the pilot and weapons systems officer into the freezing air at 600 miles per hour. Below them, the $84 million F-15E rolled into a flat spin before slamming into the rocky slope of Khuzestan, erupting in a massive blast of JP-8 fuel and wreckage. 90 miles away, two HH-60 Pavehawk rescue helicopters dropped to just 50 feet above the desert floor, their rotors throwing up a non-stop wall of dust as they raced toward the emergency beacon. High above, two A-10 Warthogs circled in support. As the lead Pavehawk slowed into a hover near the pilot's GPS position, Iranian irregular forces opened fire with RPG-7s and 23mm anti-aircraft guns concealed inside limestone caves. One round struck the lead helicopter's tail boom directly. The pilot fought to keep control as the aircraft twisted through a violent 180-degree spin, black smoke pouring across the engine intakes. At the open doors, the gunners answered with heavy .50 caliber fire, tracer rounds streaking across the hillside. Then the lead A-10 rolled into a 30-degree dive. Its GAU-8 Avenger 30mm cannon spun up to 3,900 rounds per minute, hammering the Iranian positions and tearing apart the cave entrances in bursts of rock, dust, and metal. Moments later, the second A-10 released 4 GBU-12 Paveway 2 laser-guided bombs. The 500-pound munitions locked onto the laser-marked technical vehicles below, sending them flying as the strikes hit home. Back at the landing zone, the rescue team pulled the pilot into the shaking cabin of the damaged Pavehawk, but the WSO's signal had already gone silent. With no time to spare, the helicopters powered out, their pilots pushing to maximum speed as they escaped beneath the cover of relentless 30mm cannon fire. As the HH-60 Pavehawks flared in for extraction, Iranian fighters revealed ZU-23-2 anti-aircraft cannons concealed beneath camouflage netting along the reverse slopes. A burst of 23mm armor-piercing incendiary fire slammed into the underside of the lead Pavehawk, tearing through the fuselage. Inside the cabin, 2 American crew members were struck by shrapnel as rounds ripped through the airframe. Iranian state media reportedly captured the moment of impact on camera. At the same time, 9 K-38 Eagle-S shoulder-fired missiles streaked down from the high ridgelines. The first missed its target, but the second exploded near the engine intake of the trailing HH-60, sending fragments deep into the turbine. Above the chaos, the A-10 Warthog providing cover came under heavy fire from several directions. Repeated 12.7mm impacts struck its reinforced wings and engine cowlings. On the ground, Iranian forces moved with deliberate precision, using the harsh Zagros terrain to remain inside the blind spots of the circling jets. Their tactics forced the American pilots lower and slower, straight into the heart of the anti-aircraft envelope. Even as 30mm fire rained onto their positions, the Iranians kept pressing forward, willing to sacrifice light infantry teams for a chance to bring down a rescue helicopter. On the 4-acre flight deck, the electromagnetic aircraft launch system began cycling at full intensity. Unlike older steam catapults, EMALs use tightly controlled pulses of electricity to hurl a 66,000-pound F/A-18E Super Hornet to 150 miles per hour in less than 300 feet. The launch rhythm was relentless. Every 45 seconds, another jet was thrown into the sky. We also want to recognize the men and women serving aboard the USS Gerald R. Ford and the USS Boxer. Many of you watching may have served on these ships or may have family connected to the 494th Fighter Squadron. These platforms are only as effective as the American hands that keep them mission ready. If you are a veteran or part of an active duty family, share your ship's name or your squadron's unit number in the comments. We stand with you. As the air wing aboard the USS Gerald R. Ford pushed north, the USS Boxer moved into position in the Strait of Hormuz. Iran answered with its signature asymmetric tactic, the Swarm. 40 fast attack craft built from fiberglass and armed with twin 20mm cannons and unguided rockets surged out from hidden coves around Chesham Island. They raced toward the USS Boxer at 50 miles per hour, weaving unpredictably to complicate the targeting systems. The Boxer activated its defensive perimeter, while on the flight deck, 2 AV-8B Harriers rolled into position and executed short takeoffs. Dropping to just 200 feet, the pilots used their GAU-12 Equalizer 25mm cannons to rake the lead boats. On deck, the Mark 38 25mm gun systems locked on in computer-controlled tracking mode, their barrels following the zigzagging craft and firing tight 3-round bursts that tore into the engines of the attacking vessels. When one of the boats managed to launch a 107mm rocket toward the hull, the USS Boxer answered instantly with its RIM-116 rolling airframe missile system. Spinning at 10 cycles per second as it cleared the launcher, the missile locked onto the rocket's heat signature and intercepted it roughly 200 yards from the ship. Iran's determination to keep pressing the fight soon turned into a broad, uncoordinated surge of coastal firepower. While the Boxer was still dealing with the swarm boats, Iranian forces activated mobile cruise missile launchers concealed inside limestone sea caves along the Strait of Hormuz. A volley of 4 Nor anti-ship missiles roared out, dropping to just 15 feet above the water and racing toward the Boxer at around 670 miles per hour. Inside the ship's radar room, the atmosphere shifted immediately as electronic warfare teams worked to break the incoming missile's radar locks. One of the Iranian missiles executed a sharp high-G terminal pop-up, forcing the Boxer to launch a RIM-116 at extremely close range. At the same time, Iranian artillery batteries opened a sustained barrage into the shipping lanes, sending 155mm high-explosive shells crashing into the water in an effort to disrupt the Navy's optical and electronic view of the coastline. Then, an EA-18G Growler picked up the unmistakable signal of an Iranian S-300 long-range radar. The pilot armed an AGM-88 EAA-RGM and sent it on its way. Its rocket motor pushed the missile to 1,500 miles per hour. The Iranian radar crew tried to save the site by shutting down the transmitter, but the move came too late. The missile switched over to its internal GPS and millimeter wave seeker, held onto the exact coordinates, and drove straight into the radar trailer, wiping out the system in a single strike. With those long-range sensors knocked offline, 2 F-35C Lightning II fighters moved in. Their internal weapons bays opened, releasing GBU-53/B Stormbreaker munitions that glided forward on deployable wings, using tri-mode seekers to pick out mobile missile launchers hidden along the tree lines. 3 launchers were hit almost at once. The resulting secondary blasts sent Iranian missiles cooking off in every direction, with white-hot rocket motors spiraling wildly back across nearby troop positions. Moments later, Air Force B-1B Lancer bombers received updated target coordinates through data links from the Navy's E-2D Advanced Hawkeye. The bombers opened their large internal bays and released 24 AGM-158 JASSM cruise missiles each. Flying low over the water at about 600 miles per hour, the stealthy weapon stayed just 20 feet above the surface before pulling up in the final seconds and driving down vertically onto reinforced concrete targets. The 1,000-pound penetrator struck with enormous force, driving through nearly 20 feet of earth before detonating underground. In response, Iran attempted to overwhelm the USS Gerald R. Ford's defenses with a wave of 60 Shade 136 one-way attack drones. Powered by small piston engines and moving at roughly 115 miles per hour, they came in low and steady. The Ford did not rely on missiles alone. It brought its failing CIWS into action. Guided by its own radar, the 20mm Vulcan cannon unleashed a torrent of tungsten rounds at 4,500 rounds per minute, cutting the drones out of the sky as their fuel ignited in brief flashes. At the same time, the USS Gerald R. Ford's RIM-162 ESSM batteries engaged higher altitude threats. The missiles burst out of their vertical launch cells in columns of white smoke, then snapped into hard turns to intercept Iranian anti-ship cruise missiles launched from shore. Each interception came with staggering force as the weapons collided at combined speeds exceeding 4,000 miles per hour. In a final attempt to challenge the blockade, the Iranian Air Force launched its remaining F-14 Tomcats and MiG-29s. But Navy F-35C, Lightning IIs, and F/A-18E Super Hornets had already tracked them from 150 miles away using the AN/APG-81 AESA radar. The Navy pilots responded with AIM-120D AMR-AAM missiles, weapons capable of reaching nearly 3,000 miles per hour and guiding themselves with active radar in the final phase. Iranian pilots were effectively flying blind, with their systems disrupted by EA-18G Growlers. Within the first minute of the fight, 4 Iranian aircraft were brought down before their crews could react. The AMRAAM strikes hit with such force that the jets broke apart in midair. One Iranian MiG-29 tried to push in close for a gun attack, but a Navy FA-18E Super Hornet pilot answered with an AIM-9X Sidewinder and the joint helmet-mounted cueing system. The pilot simply turned his head, locked the target by sight, and fired. The AIM-9X then pulled a brutal 60G maneuver with thrust vectoring control, bending into a near 180-degree arc before striking the forward section of the MiG-29. The Iranian Navy then tried to push its larger frigates out of port, but the movement did not go unnoticed. The USS Boxer tracked the sortie and launched two F/A-18E Super Hornets armed with AGM-84 Harpoon anti-ship missiles. Flying at a sea-skimming altitude of just 15 feet and traveling at roughly 530 miles per hour, the Harpoons were extremely difficult to pick out against the clutter of the waves. The first missile struck an Iranian frigate at the waterline, and its 488-pound warhead detonated inside the ship's internal weapons storage area. The blast was catastrophic, and the vessel went down within minutes. The second Harpoon slammed into the port's fuel pier, setting off a chain of secondary explosions that took out 3 additional patrol boats and crippled the main fueling infrastructure of the local Iranian naval base. As the USS Gerald R. Ford moved into a tighter blockade position under the cover of a sandstorm, Iran shifted to another tactic. Civilian-style dhows began dropping large numbers of EM-52 rocket-rising mines into the deep water channels. These mines were designed to detect a passing vessel and launch a rocket-propelled warhead upward into the hull. The USS Boxer's sonar picked up the first launch as a sharp acoustic spike rising fast from the seabed. The mine detonated about 50 feet off the ship's port side, and the shock temporarily disabled part of the vessel's secondary communications system. Iran continued trying to disrupt operations with rockets and naval mines while also using the captured weapons systems officer as leverage. U.S. forces answered with tightly coordinated precision strikes, clearing immediate threats and stabilizing the area around the rescue effort. A final wave of heavy airstrikes then targeted key missile infrastructure and nuclear-related sites, severely reducing Iran's ability to respond in force. With organized resistance increasingly broken down, U.S. forces held the initiative and pressed forward with the rescue mission as the wider confrontation moved toward a decisive turning point.